the things that we can control versus the things that we can't control? Let's talk about first what you can control, and then we'll move forward with what you can control. What you cannot control is you cannot control that the demand for the opportunity. And I'm going to see if I can get my clicker to work there. So the demand for the opportunity is the fact that you're now at there, the tip. You're at the stage where there's less positions out there. We can't change the shape of the org chart. And another thing you can't do is go back and take a step back, because the second you take a step back and you say, well, you know, I don't really have to do that role. Maybe I could take a more junior role. What you're doing now is you're putting yourself in danger of being completely overqualified for that job. And it would be interesting to quantify something that I really haven't had the opportunity to quantify over the years. But I've talked to so many executives who they will say, I'll be working with them to hire people. And they'll say, well, I don't want to hire that person because they're overqualified. They actually have more experience than their supervisor, so that wouldn't work. But yet they completely forget that when they're on the market. Because if there's something that I figured out that made me want to change careers to this side of the business versus working for the company, is that when you are on a job search, this is a personal thing. And when you're hiring somebody, it is a business decision. And anything that you've ever told a headhunter or your recruiter or whoever's in charge of hiring people that you need to hire simply goes out the door of logic when it's ourselves, myself included. So we can't control the fact that there's less demand at the top. Secondly, we can't control the supply. The other element in the fact that there's less seats for positions for people than people who want them is that because the average executive role is only about 18 months to 2 years, that means that everybody's always looking. So a lot of you out there listening might be like, well, this is my first time actually looking for a job search, or looking for a job. And that is one of the biggest aha moments that people have when they start realizing all these things, like, wow, there are things that I probably didn't take into consideration. But once you realize that the average executive role only lasts a year and a half to 2 years, constantly being disrupted at the top by mergers and acquisitions and new private equity investors and your expertise. Let's say your expertise is that you turn around a company. Well, you go in there and you turn around a company. You don't stay. You go look for your next thing. So because of that, everybody's always looking. So now, for the first time in your career, your competition isn't just the unemployed market. Your competition's actually everybody. I mean, think about it. Even when they do get recruiters involved, they don't go out and ask recruiters to find people who are looking. They're sourcing everybody, and they're sourcing that talent. The next thing we can't control is we can't control the environment. That could mean the economy. That could mean a shrinking market. There are several industries right now that are shrinking markets: advertising, entertainment. There's cyclical markets like oil and gas. Here in Texas, we deal with that quite frequently. It's up, it's down. You may not control that. And that is going to affect a lot of the supply and demand issue out there for the role. And we can't control that. The other thing we can't control are preconceived biases. There are preconceived biases out there for certain things that may be on your resume, such as recent consulting. If you've been consulting for the last 3 to 5 years, let's say, there's going to be a bias that for a leadership role that you're not up to speed. You see things from the outside. And that's just one of the preconceived biases that we have to deal with. There's lots of other preconceived biases as well. There's, there's ageism. There's all sorts of things that people already have in their minds, and we really can't do anything about. The next is the applicant tracking system. So the ATS doesn't just work on keywords anymore. It works on some form of AI. So the shape and format and a lot about the resume has changed because of that. But if the applicant tracking system is looking for a certain thing, and that's not something that you have, tricking it is not going to help. And I do believe a lot of these applicant tracking systems now are adopting what I know Google does, which is where if you just dump stuff like white letters on white space just to get an applicant tracking system to trigger you, it will not recognize that. So there's really not a lot of tricking that can happen. And that's why we'll put that in the category of something you can't control. So what would I mean by customer naivete? Well, if you remember when we talked about the 97% versus the 3%, and I'm dealing with a CEO who's looking to fill a CFO position, I would get pretty frustrated when my income depended on a placement and to find out that my client ended up hiring somebody that didn't have any of the things that they told me they were looking for. So what I did is I started digging into that, and I started figuring out, like, why is that? And that's when I started realizing that they were operating on giving me information about what that they were looking for that really had no basis whatsoever. Like, I really need somebody to have a Big Four public private CPA. That's the experience I want. I started asking why. And that was a question that they really couldn't answer. A lot of times it was because, well, if you look at our competition and you look at that CFO, that's what they have. Or we had somebody that worked out really well that had that. Or we had somebody that did not work out that didn't have that. I mean, all these sort of random criteria for what they thought they needed. So we're going to put all these things under the category of things that we cannot control. So here's the rule we can use in life to change whatever it is that we can control. The more you cannot control, the more you need to leverage what you can. So let's start out with something that you can control. What you can control is the narrative that you communicate. So here's a little marketing lingo for you. All that means is that how our brains operate is that our brains have 30 thoughts per second. We don't know what those thoughts are. They're happening subliminally, and we just take them all and we form a story with it. And whatever that story is that we tell ourselves in actually the first 2 to 3 seconds, all we're going to do from that point forward is look for evidence to prove ourselves right. That's how our brain works. So marketers know this, and marketers say, okay, well, let's control the narrative. Now, in marketing, when you're marketing a product, you want to control the narrative with the benefit, not your skills, not your experience, not the product description, but the benefit. So when we control the narrative, other things that you see on the other side of the column will start to disappear in recognition. They fade into the background. Preconceived biases around your past. A tight environment, that narrative will put you higher up if it's actually the problem they need to solve. That narrative is really up to you to communicate that. Also, how you communicate that narrative is up to you as well. One of the things that we focus very heavily on at ExecuNet is knowing that you don't communicate this narrative the same way to everyone, because different audiences have different agendas. So like as if you were a product and a marketing team was going to go out there and say, we're going to take this product to market, they would understand that there's different personas of that market. And everybody that you need to communicate your value to is going to fit into one of three audiences. One is your resume reviewer, two is your interviewer, and three is your network. And if you're treating it as a one size fits all, a lot of things will go wrong in the interview. Thirdly, what you can control is how you get found, how people find you. The main reason I started doing LinkedIn workshops in 2008 was because as a recruiter, we were already on LinkedIn all day, every day, even in 2008. And the problem is not everybody was on LinkedIn. And I wanted it to be easy to find people on LinkedIn. I would rather be able to type in information and be able to have LinkedIn give that to me. Now, LinkedIn has a tool, and I think it was coming out around about the same time, called LinkedIn Recruiter, which has so many filters. It basically turns what is now a 700 million member platform into your own personal database as a recruiter. Not to mention, one of the reasons that the recruiting world got disrupted and they don't really work on executive roles as much anymore is because everybody has access to network. If I was working, if there was a role that needed to be filled at 200K and above in the early 2000s, headhunters would most likely get the call. And maybe they've reached out to 2 or 3 people. Now, if a search makes it all the way to a headhunter, they've already reached out to 20 or 30 people. So how are you being found by those people? And then the last thing that we can control is the activity and strategy around your whole entire pipeline of your job search. And the reason that I'm bringing these items up, which you may think have nothing to do with the interview, they actually have so much to do with the interview. Because once you really wrap your mind around these concepts and then realize, wow, I am a product. If you had a company, let's just say, that was taking a product to market and they were struggling getting sales, then you would say, okay, is it really the salesperson that can't close the deal? Or is it the marketing team that's not getting the salespeople in front of the right customers? So a bad strategy would be to say, well, it's definitely the salespeople. If they're going in there and they can't close the deal, then we just need to get new salespeople. But now we understand that if you're a product that's, not an impulse product, but rather a product that's going to cost a company, 2, 3, 400, 7 figures a year, then you have to know you can't just go flyer the neighborhood and expect to close some deals. So here's that parallel. Your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and your network are basically your marketing department. Once you're in conversations with stakeholders, that is the interview. So here's where we really get to the troubleshooting of the job search that is not a one size fits all, because some people have the problem in their marketing. They're doing their marketing, but their marketing is not getting them into the right room. And they end up going on interviews and getting offers that have no ability or even need to bring on horsepower that they bring to the table. Some people are getting beat out by competition that they clearly bring more experience to the table then, and that may be a sales issue.